Morning guys, on today's episode I'm going to show you something that I should have did a long time ago and make a longer front drive shaft. Alright, welcome back to Fab and Adventures guys. Today we're extending the front drive shaft here and I'm going to show you how to do it, why to do it, and it's really quite a simple job. So you can see here that I've got a front spacer and a rear spacer, and that's going to basically make your angle, your front drive shaft angle, fairly steep. So by removing these two spacers, my angle should lessen and it should hopefully reduce the amount of vibration I feel in four-wheel drive high especially. So let's see how that works out. So one of the main problems you create when you lift these Samurais, and it's a really common thing to do, is to lift these guys up, but the big problem you create is you make your drive shaft angles too steep and it introduces vibration. So let's throw my angle finder on here, see where we're at right now, and then see how much it changes after we build the new drive shaft. So it looks like, depending on where you put it, 17 degrees. Yeah, 17.15 degrees. So by taking this spacer away and that spacer away, we're basically going to lift the drive shaft up here, lower it in the rear, and that should change our angle. The big problem really with lifting them is your transfer case is already kind of angled up, you know, and you don't want to change your front pinion angle because that will change your caster and camber and all that stuff, and it'll make it steer crappy. So, you know, when your transfer case is here and your front diff is here, you know, it's not too far of a distance, but when you lift them, you make that drive shaft angle quite a bit steeper. So that's what we're going to try and combat, and because this thing vibrates like crazy when you're in four-wheel drive high. So what you're looking at here is my front drive shaft. Another front Samurai drive shaft that I acquired. It's got a little bit different system here. It looks a little more sealed on your splines here. And this here is a rear drive shaft from a '89 Tracker, Chevy Tracker, something like that. Same diameter, looks to be the same yoke. So basically all I'm going to do is here's your spacers that were on each side of the drive shaft. So basically what I'm thinking I want to do is basically just make this 2 inches longer, because that's the thickness that I have here, right? So what we're going to do is take this yoke out, put this yoke on so that it still fits the transfer case. And then we're going to measure out and we're going to cut this piece of tube 2 inches longer than this piece of tube. Then we'll have to cut this because we're going to need the slip yoke, whichever we use, if we use this one or we use this one. And we're just going to need the front section from the Samurai drive shaft, slip it in, weld it onto this shaft. I know it sounds a little complicated, but it's really quite simple. And that'll extend my front drive shaft, and that should hopefully change my angle. So if you can imagine your stock transfer case here and your front pinion here in a stock form on a Samurai, now that angle is not so bad, but when you lift your Samurai, like mine went up 10 inches, you can imagine how steep your drive shaft ends up being, and that creates, you know, I'll exaggerate it here, but that creates a bunch of bind when you go to turn. You know, when your drive shaft goes to turn, it creates bindage. And then especially if you really are, you know, articulating and your drive shaft drops even more, you know, then you're really going to start binding your drive shafts. So that's a bad thing. You don't want that. So what we're going to do is extend this one and go from there. Okay, so let's see what we got here. These spacers here, 2 inches, 3/16. So let's measure basically from weld to weld, center of weld to center of weld. And that would be, there's the center of that weld. So we're looking at 16 and 5/16. So we want 18 and 5/16 basically, give or take. Somewhere in that vicinity is where we want to cut it off. We can cut it off just to the long side of that, and we should be smiling. If you guys are ever trying to cut pipe perfectly round, you know, perfectly square to the length of it, get yourself some of this pipe wrap. This stuff here is for 6" to 30", so obviously this is smaller than you're supposed to be using on it, but it still works. And super handy for dealing with any sort of pipe, like when I built that smoker and stuff. Before you pull your drive shafts apart, make sure you check and make sure the dots are aligned. So there's a dot here, obviously there's a dot here, and when you pull your drive shaft out or your yoke off, there's another dot in here, and those dots should line up when you put it back together. That way you know you've got your drive shaft back in phase. So in phase means this C here matches this C over here, not a quarter turnout, not a half turnout. That's why these drive shaft yokes and splines have dots on them, is to help line them up. And here you can see the dot on this one. Well, you probably can't on video, but the dot is there, and there's a dot right there on the splines, and you basically just match them up, and that's where they go back together. That way, if you ever took your drive shaft apart, you know, slipped it apart out on the trail or whatever, you know exactly where to put it back together so that the drive shaft will be in phase and balanced and won't be shaking all over. So here's a fun little fact. I cut this '89 Tracker drive shaft, and inside, I don't know if you'll be able to see that, but it has a cardboard tube inside. So my yoke is not going to just slip in there. I'm going to have to cut this cardboard tube back just a little bit. That way the yoke will slip in and I can weld it up. But I imagine that must be for dampening or something. It's odd, I've never seen that before. So we're just going to take the front half of this guy, put them on here, weld them on, clean it all up and weld them on. I've got the cardboard out of the way and I've got it deburred on the inside. We're going to get rid of this flange and put this flange on here and weld her up, and we should be good to go. So it shouldn't take too long. I'll have to grind this weld down so I can pop this yoke apart and get it out of the drive shaft tube and get it prepared to put inside this one and weld her up. All right, so I actually had a great idea. Why not use the lathe to cut this weld down? So I got her chucked up in here. I've got her squared, all the run out taken out of it so it turns perfectly. And now we're just gonna cut this weld off. Just got to get me some safety glasses. All right, let's cut this bad boy. There we go. Got her parted off. All right, now hopefully it'll just come out of there. There we go, that's the part we're looking for. Now it's pretty easy to find where you need to part this off. I mean, you can kind of see the line once you clean the weld off. You can kind of see the line, and then you just bring a parting tool in and start cutting, and it'll cut the drive shaft tube it'll cut the drive shaft tube easier than it cuts this flange, because this flange is hardened. So just don't get after it too hard. You know, otherwise you'll kill your cutter if you're just using a high-speed steel. But just start cutting and just move over a little bit, little bit, little bit. Pretty soon you'll see the hole parting tool cut a little bit. Just cut real slow and just keep cutting real slow at her. And all of a sudden you'll see a little rust line. As soon as you see the rust line, you've cut through and you're good to go. So now we are ready to fit this to the other drive shaft tube. Now these drive shaft, these flanges are put in with the shaft hot. And they slip in. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this guy, put him in the freezer. When he's good and cold, I'll come out. We'll heat this flange up. Hopefully we'll be able to just slip it on, set it where we want it, and then we'll be able to weld it. All right, we're back. The old spline should be good and cold now. We're just going to heat this up, run and grab the splines, heat this up some more, and hopefully we can slip it on. Alright, and just to double check, we'll put the old level on, see what we get. Oh yeah, I'm bang on, I'm within 1/3 of a degree. I think that's good enough. 0.3 of a degree, that's as close as she's gonna get. Okay, we can take her to the table and weld her up. So all we're going to do here is we're going to throw a couple tacks in it, then we're going to assemble the rear U-joint, put the slip of yoke on, put it in the Zook, make sure everything is good, make sure it's not too tight where I have no splines left for suspension, and then we'll weld it solid. All right, we'll just throw this glove over here to protect the splines. And we'll give her a couple of tacks. Alright, so U-joints, fairly simple to put together. Let's just see here. Where's our mark? Here's our mark. That's how she wants to go back together. So all I did was I cleaned up these yokes here with a little bit of like 400 grit sandpaper. We're just going to slip those guys in, put the caps in. Basically just compress them with this C-clamp. There we go. That one's being stubborn to push in. Just like that. I'm getting ready to weld. We want a really good weld on this, so we're going to clean it up good with acetone. And I've already kind of V-notched it out so that we got good penetration on there. Now that she's good and clean, we can weld it. Now we'll put our tester on there and see what our angle difference is. Yeah, looks like it only changed it about a degree, but at least we won't have those spacers front and rear to work the bolts loose like it seems to do. I think that's going to be great. I'm going to have to cut a notch out of this cross member here, because now now that the drive shaft is further back, it brings it closer to this cross member. Like I can't even get my finger in between the drive shaft and the cross member, so I'm gonna have to cut out a little notch, re-weld it, strengthen it up, and she'll be good. That way when the front diff drops down, that the drive shaft doesn't hit the cross member. All right guys, so I'm just gonna attempt to show you what I did to notch the cross member. And it's hard to do it, and excuse if the video is kind of shaky because I don't got stabilization on this lens. But it gives you kind of an idea of basically of just what I did to the cross member to make it work. Try it like this. So now I just got to shoot a little paint on there and give her a test fit. See how she works. All right, so we got the old drive shaft done here. Works perfectly. I've already pre-tested in the Samurai, and I've got enough spline clearance here for your suspension travel, and there should be lots there for articulation. And all I got to do is modify my cross member just a little bit, and she's a done deal. So you guys are liking this sort of content, go ahead, subscribe, share, like these videos. Make sure you give me a thumbs up and hit the bell to be notified. If you want to follow me on Instagram, it's @fabin_adventures. We'll catch you guys next Sunday. I'm gonna go put this in.